It starts on what should be an uneventful afternoon across the Central Plains. The sky is calm, a clear stretch of blue from horizon to horizon, until a faint shadow forms in the distant west. At first it looks like an approaching line of storms, but the shape is wrong. There are no flashes of lightning, no towering thunderheads. Instead, the horizon darkens into a solid, rising wall, an advancing mass of airborne earth driven by powerful winds. As it grows, it becomes clear that this is not an ordinary weather front. It is a massive dust storm, the kind meteorologists classify as a large-scale haboob, capable of swallowing cities and smothering daylight in minutes. When the storm arrives, it does not feel sudden, yet it hits with overwhelming force. Wind gusts surpassing roughly 60 miles per hour push the dust forward like a moving cliff of soil, gravel, and pulverized topsoil ripped from dry fields. The moment the front reaches populated areas, daylight collapses. Streets, neighborhoods, and farm roads are thrown into near total darkness as visibility drops to only a few feet. Anyone caught outside is immediately disoriented, reduced to seeing only their hands in front of their face, the air thick with choking grit. Within moments, panic ripples across highways as drivers lose all sense of direction. Headlights become useless beams scattered by swirling particles, forcing motorists to halt wherever they are, on shoulders, in lanes, or even in the middle of intersections. Emergency dispatchers are inundated with calls, reporting stalled vehicles, lost drivers, and minor collisions caused by the blinding conditions. As the sun disappears behind the storm's towering edge, the temperature begins to drop. Without direct sunlight, large areas can experience a rapid decline in heat, potentially falling by 10 to 20 degrees Fahrenheit in under an hour. The air becomes noticeably cooler, adding a sharp bite to the already suffocating atmosphere. Inside homes and businesses, lights flicker on automatically, but they do little to cut through the swirling blackness outside. The abrasive sound of dust scraping against windows and metal siding replaces the usual daytime noise. Even those safely indoors begin to sense that something unprecedented is unfolding. The reality sinks in. This is not a passing dust plume or a short-lived weather oddity. This is the beginning of a regional blackout created entirely by earth and wind. And in this first hour, before systems fail, before agriculture suffers, before the long-term consequences set in, the plains find themselves plunged into a darkness so complete and so immediate that millions of people struggle to understand what has just happened. As the darkness stretches beyond the first hour, the disaster shifts from a terrifying atmospheric event to a full-scale systems crisis. The storm does not weaken, instead it spreads, covering hundreds of miles of open land and densely populated areas. Across the plains, one of the earliest major failures begins in the energy sector. Many states in this region rely on large solar installations for a meaningful share of daytime electricity. When the dust wall arrives, those facilities go dark instantly. Panels that normally absorb sunlight are now trapped beneath layers of gritty sediment, producing virtually no power. This rapid collapse of solar generation happens at the exact moment millions of people are switching on lights, air purifiers, and emergency devices to cope with the darkness. The grid suddenly faces a dual stressor, a steep loss in energy supply paired with a sharp spike in demand. While grid operators can draw from reserve sources or activate natural gas plants, the shift is abrupt enough that rolling blackouts begin to appear in scattered communities. These outages deepen the confusion and make communication difficult as cell towers and small substations begin operating on backup power. Meanwhile, the air itself is becoming more hazardous by the minute. Dust storms of this magnitude carry extremely fine particulate matter known as PM 2.5, particles small enough to bypass the body's natural defenses and settle deep in the lungs. Even those indoors are not fully protected. Modern buildings with high-efficiency filtration can reduce exposure, but many homes across rural parts of the plains rely on basic HVAC systems that cannot stop microscopic particles. As filters clog, indoor air quality drops sharply, forcing people to seal windows and door frames with towels or plastic to slow the infiltration of dust. Hospitals and clinics begin to see a rise in respiratory distress cases. For people with asthma, chronic lung conditions, or compromised immune systems, prolonged exposure to airborne dust can trigger dangerous inflammation. While today's medical understanding is far better than during the Dust Bowl era, the health risk remains very real, and medical facilities must quickly ration masks, inhalers, and oxygen supplies. Transportation networks also falter. Highways remain gridlocked or temporarily shut down as visibility stays near zero. Rail operations slow dramatically because train engineers cannot safely navigate through opaque, dust-filled air, and sensors along tracks begin to malfunction due to grid accumulation. Air travel across the region is suspended altogether, as airports have no safe runway visibility and aircraft engines cannot operate reliably in the abrasive storm. By the 12th hour, the dust storm has exposed how interdependent modern systems truly are. One environmental shock has already begun to strain power, transportation, healthcare, and communication networks, and while the storm will eventually weaken, the cascading failures it triggers are only beginning to unfold. By the third day, the storm has evolved into something less violent but far more unsettling. The towering wall of dust is no longer sweeping across the plains at full force, yet the sky is still shrouded in a dense reddish-brown haze. Sunlight manages to push through in faint muted bands, creating an eerie twilight that lingers from morning to evening. Although the immediate danger of complete blackout has passed, this sustained dimming introduces a new set of challenges that grow more serious with each passing hour. Agriculture, one of the defining features of the plains, starts to show visible signs of stress. Crops like corn, wheat, and soybeans depend heavily on consistent sunlight for photosynthesis, and the prolonged haze limits the amount of solar energy they can absorb. Scientific studies have shown that high concentrations of airborne particulate matter can reduce the amount of available sunlight by a significant percentage, which in turn decreases crop productivity. Even short disruptions can cause measurable losses. For farmers already operating on tight seasonal windows, a multi-day reduction in light and a layer of abrasive dust covering leaves can jeopardize their entire year's yield. Livestock operations face their own problems. Dust settling on open water sources increases contamination risk, and grazing lands are coated with sediment that animals can inhale or ingest. Many ranchers are forced to relocate cattle into sheltered areas, if available, to reduce exposure. Although modern veterinary care helps mitigate some dangers, prolonged dust inhalation can still cause respiratory irritation and reduced feeding. Transportation remains heavily restricted. The storm's lingering haze drastically limits visibility for aircraft, keeping many regional airports grounded. On highways, blowing dust and leftover drifts continue to create hazards, especially in open rural stretches. Rail networks face delays as maintenance crews work to clear dust accumulation from critical track components, sensors, and switches. These disruptions ripple outward, slowing the movement of food, fuel, and medical supplies. Supply chains that rely on predictable schedules begin to unravel. Warehouses depend on timely deliveries, and shortages emerge when trucks and trains fail to move goods efficiently. While businesses and emergency services tap into stored reserves, these supplies were never designed to support long-term regional outages. Communities on the outer edges of the affected zones start to notice reduced availability of essentials, like fresh produce, livestock feed, and replacement air filters. Public health agencies issue new advisories warning residents that PM 2.5 concentrations remain elevated. Even though winds have weakened, fine particles stay suspended in the atmosphere for days due to their extremely small size. Hospitals report a steady growing demand for respiratory treatments, particularly in smaller towns that lack specialized equipment. By the end of the 72-hour mark, the region is caught in a delicate balance. The worst of the storm may have passed, but the lingering haze, damaged crops, strained supply chains, and ongoing health risks reveal how quickly a massive dust event can reshape daily life. The plains are no longer in immediate darkness, yet the path to recovery is already proving far more difficult than anyone expected. By the end of the first week, the massive dust storm has largely passed, but the crisis is far from over. Winds have calmed, yet the air remains filled with fine particulate matter, making outdoor activity hazardous without proper respiratory protection. Even a simple walk outside can expose people to PM 2.5 particles, which penetrate deep into the lungs and aggravate pre-existing conditions such as asthma or chronic bronchitis. Public health warnings continue, emphasizing that staying indoors with sealed ventilation systems is the safest option for most residents. The most visible impact is on the land itself. Dust that was airborne for days is now settling, forming thick layers across streets, farmland, and rural infrastructure. Roads, fences, and farm equipment are buried under a suffocating blanket of soil. Vehicles, tractors, and construction machinery must be cleaned and inspected before they can operate safely, while critical road and rail networks require extensive clearing to resume normal traffic. For many rural communities, small-town streets resemble a desert landscape, and the sheer volume of deposited dust overwhelms local cleanup capabilities. Agriculture suffers further setbacks as the accumulated dust covers crops and grazing land. While some plants survive under the layer of sediment, many are stunted, and the potential yield of wheat, corn, and soybeans declines significantly. Soil quality is altered, nutrient-rich topsoil may be stripped from some areas, leaving less fertile ground, while in other locations, the deposited dust adds weight and density that can harm young plants. Livestock, meanwhile, continue to struggle with contaminated water sources and grazing fields, forcing ranchers to implement emergency feeding strategies. The economic fallout begins to compound. Cleaning the dust is costly and labor-intensive. Machinery and vehicles may require repairs from abrasive dust damage, while industrial operations that rely on clean air intake, such as manufacturing plants, face production slowdowns or temporary shutdowns. Hospitals and clinics experience increased patient loads due to respiratory issues, adding pressure to already strained healthcare systems. Insurance claims for property damage, crop loss, and infrastructure repairs mount rapidly, putting additional strain on local and regional resources. Transportation remains challenged despite calmer winds. Airport operations continue to experience delays as residual dust clouds affect visibility. Highways and rural roads, partially buried under silt, impede deliveries of essential goods, slowing the movement of food, fuel, and emergency supplies. Rail systems work to restore functionality, but face delays due to sediment accumulation in critical track areas and mechanical equipment exposed to dust damage. By the seventh day, the massive dust storm has shifted from an immediate threat to a lingering hazard. The air is clearing gradually, yet the economic, environmental, and public health impacts remain severe. The plains are visibly transformed, communities face significant cleanup challenges, and the strain on agriculture, transportation, and healthcare illustrates how a single, prolonged dust storm can leave long-lasting scars across the region. The initial shock has passed, but the path to full recovery is just beginning. 1 month after the dust storm swept across the plains, the skies are finally clearer, but the aftermath is still painfully visible. Communities are coated in a layer of fine dust, both inside homes and on every surface outside. Even after extensive cleanup, residual sediment continues to affect air quality, clogging ventilation systems and forcing ongoing use of protective masks. Many households and businesses are dealing with long-term damage to electronics, machinery, and vehicles that were exposed to abrasive particles. Agriculture is facing the most enduring consequences. Fields that were buried under thick layers of dust have reduced fertility, while crops that survived the storm show delayed growth due to sunlight deprivation and mechanical damage from wind-blown soil. Livestock operations continue to struggle with partially contaminated grazing areas and water sources, forcing farmers to bring in supplementary feed and water for several weeks. These challenges threaten local and regional food supply chains, with economic losses mounting across the heartland. Transportation and logistics remain disrupted. Rural roads, bridges, and rail lines take time to fully reopen, especially in remote communities where sediment accumulation was heaviest. The initial disruption in supply chains has created cascading shortages in grocery stores, fuel depots, and medical facilities, with some smaller towns experiencing scarcity for weeks. Nationally, the economic impact extends beyond the plains as the cost of rebuilding, cleaning, and supplementing lost agricultural output strains regional budgets. The psychological toll on residents is significant. Living through near total darkness, breathing hazardous air, and witnessing the transformation of familiar landscapes into dust-choked wastelands leaves lasting stress. Emergency responders, farmers, and community members alike face months of recovery work, testing both physical endurance and mental resilience. The storm becomes a historical benchmark, a reminder of how quickly nature can overwhelm even modern systems and infrastructure. Environmentally, the plains have been altered. Wind and rain following the storm continue to redistribute dust, affecting soil composition in surrounding areas and creating higher vulnerability to erosion and future droughts. While a single event does not recreate the Dust Bowl of the 1930s, it does highlight the potential for human activity and climate conditions to exacerbate natural hazards, leaving the land more fragile than before. By the end of the first month, life slowly returns to a semblance of normalcy, Power grids have stabilized, supply chains are catching up, and air quality gradually improves. Yet the memory of the blackout, the suffocating dust, and the disruptions to daily life remains vivid. This hypothetical scenario underscores that while massive dust storms may seem extreme, their potential to disrupt agriculture, infrastructure, public health, and psychology is real and measurable. The plains have endured the storm, but the lingering shadow serves as a stark warning of nature's immense and often underestimated power. Imagine a calm evening in a sprawling city. Glass towers glow with warm lights, traffic hums below, and everything feels solid, stable, and predictable. Now picture that same skyline, with a single impossible change, an enormous circle of empty space where a towering building stood just moments before. No explosion, no fire, just a silent void where the ground opened without warning. It feels like a scene from a big-budget disaster film, but the unsettling question is whether nature could really pull this off. The idea of a skyscraper vanishing into the earth overnight sounds absurd, but the truth is that our planet's surface is not as still as it seems. Beneath city streets, offices, and subway lines, geological processes are constantly reshaping the ground, sometimes quietly and sometimes violently. To understand whether this nightmare scenario could ever be real, we have to start with how the Earth creates sinkholes in the first place. A sinkhole is a natural depression or sudden collapse of the ground surface, and it forms when underground material is removed or destabilized. These collapses don't strike randomly, they occur most often in what geologists call karst regions, areas where the underlying bedrock, often limestone, dolomite, or gypsum, dissolves gradually in water. When rainwater absorbs carbon dioxide from the atmosphere, it becomes slightly acidic. Over long periods, that weak acid seeps into the ground and begins dissolving the rock below. While this chemical reaction is extremely slow, it steadily hollows out passages, chambers, and networks of underground voids. On the surface, the landscape may look perfectly normal, even though deep beneath it, empty spaces are quietly growing. There are two main ways these hollow spaces reveal themselves. Sometimes the surface slowly sinks as underground cavities expand, creating gentle depressions. More dramatically, a sudden collapse can occur when the roof of an underground void becomes too thin to support the weight above it. This is what geologists refer to as a cover collapse sinkhole. These collapses can happen quickly, sometimes within hours, and the result can be a steep, circular hole that appears with frightening speed. Even more troubling, human activity can make these collapses more likely. Excessive groundwater pumping, leaking drainage pipes, poorly managed stormwater systems, and construction vibrations can destabilize the upper layers of soil and accelerate the natural process. Around the world, sinkholes have swallowed cars, roads, and homes in a matter of minutes. In some cities, they have consumed entire sections of streets. These events remind us that the Earth's surface is not a solid shell, but a thin layer resting on top of dynamic, dissolving rock. Still, while the destructive power of sinkholes is undeniable, the question remains, could any of these natural processes possibly scale up to something large enough to take down a modern skyscraper? Next, we will look at what it actually takes to hold a skyscraper upright, and what conditions would be required for the ground below one to collapse completely. To understand whether a sinkhole could ever take down a skyscraper, we need to look beneath the surface, literally. A modern high-rise may appear delicate from a distance, all shimmering glass and narrow lines, but everything about its design is built around one goal, making sure it stays firmly attached to the earth. The height you see above ground is only part of the story. The real strength of a skyscraper lies in what anchors it deep below street level. Engineers spend years studying the geology of a building site because a tall structure cannot rely on surface soil alone. That loose upper layer shifts with moisture, compacts under weight, and is far too unstable to support hundreds of thousands of tons of steel and concrete. Before construction even begins, engineers conduct detailed geotechnical investigations to understand every layer beneath the future tower. They drill deep boreholes to extract core samples and use seismic testing to map underground conditions. These studies reveal whether strong bedrock is close to the surface or buried far below. In cities built on exceptionally tough rock, like the schist beneath Manhattan, skyscrapers can anchor directly into the solid formation. This natural foundation allows engineers to transfer the immense weight of the building into rock that has been stable for millions of years. In places where strong bedrock lies deeper, engineers rely on deep foundation systems. One common method uses piles, long columns made of concrete or steel, driven far into the ground until they reach a layer capable of supporting massive loads. Some of the world's tallest buildings sit on foundation piles that extend tens of meters below the surface. These piles do not depend on loose soil to hold them in place. Instead, they carry the building's weight downward until it reaches firm, compressed ground or bedrock. This creates a foundation system that behaves like an array of incredibly strong legs supporting the structure. Many skyscrapers also include massive reinforced concrete mats at their base. These mats spread the building's weight more evenly and improve stability in areas where soil layers vary in strength. Combined with deep piles or caissons, these mats help ensure that no single weak layer can undermine the entire structure. Builders also design foundations with safety factors well beyond the building's normal load to ensure that seasonal changes, groundwater fluctuations, or minor soil shifts cannot compromise the structure. Because of this complex engineering, a skyscraper is not simply resting on the earth, it is locked into it. For a sinkhole to threaten a building of this scale, the collapse would need to be far larger and deeper than anything typically seen in urban environments. It would have to destroy not only the surface layers, but also the stable material deep below that the foundation depends on. In the next part, we will examine what kind of extreme conditions would be required for such a collapse to unfold. A major contributor is the slow decay of underground infrastructure. Old water mains, storm drains, and sewer lines can leak for years, washing away soil grain by grain. In large cities, some pipes are more than 100 years old, and even minor cracks can create steady erosion cavities that expand unnoticed. Engineers call this process piping, and it can hollow out huge underground voids long before surface cracks ever appear. Another issue comes from the weight of the city itself. Skyscrapers, elevated highways, subway tunnels, and heavy traffic all put enormous pressure on the ground. If the soil beneath is already weakened by natural dissolution or quiet water flow, that pressure can accelerate subsurface collapse. Even well-designed foundations can become stressed when the geology changes unexpectedly. Construction activity also plays a role. Deep excavation for basements, parking garages, and utility tunnels can alter groundwater levels. When groundwater drops, the support it once provided to the soil disappears. In regions with soluble rock, losing that water balance allows underground cavities to grow faster. In other cases, vibrations from construction equipment can destabilize loose or water-softened soil, encouraging the ground to shift. Modern cities often hide their geological past. A skyscraper might be built over an old filled-in quarry, an abandoned drainage channel, or soil that was artificially compacted decades earlier. These materials can behave unpredictably over long periods of time. What looks stable at the surface may not reflect what is happening deep below. Climate shifts add another layer of risk. Periods of heavy rainfall can overwhelm drainage systems, increasing the water pressure underground. When too much water moves through fractured rock or loose fill, it can trigger sudden subsurface erosion. Meanwhile, long dry spells can shrink certain soils, especially clay-rich layers, creating gaps around foundations that weaken surface support. All of these factors combine to create a complex and often invisible threat. Cities rarely fail from a single cause. Sinkhole disasters usually happen when multiple small vulnerabilities line up at the worst possible moment. And because most of the danger is hidden beneath pavement and concrete, early warning signs are easy to miss. Modern sinkhole detection begins with ground-penetrating radar. This technology sends radio waves into the earth and measures how they bounce back. When engineers see irregular reflections, it can indicate underground voids, weakened soil, or pockets of dissolved rock. Ground-penetrating radar is especially useful in urban environments because it can scan paved surfaces without excavation. Another essential tool is microgravity surveying. The concept is simple. Empty spaces underground have slightly lower gravitational pull than solid ground. When sensors detect subtle gravity changes, analysts can map where underground cavities might be forming. This method is valuable for locating voids beneath foundations, roadways, and utility corridors. LiDAR scanning is also becoming more common in cities. By bouncing laser pulses off the ground from aircraft or drones, LiDAR can detect even tiny changes in elevation. If a surface begins to sag by a fraction of an inch, it may signal that the soil below is shifting or settling unevenly. These early depressions often develop long before a sinkhole becomes visible. Acoustic monitoring adds another layer of protection. Sensitive instruments can pick up faint cracking, shifting, or moving soil beneath structures. Changes in natural underground vibrations, known as seismic noise, help engineers identify when the ground is loosening or collapsing internally. This approach works continuously, providing early warnings without interrupting city activity. Soil sampling also plays an important role. Engineers drill narrow boreholes to study the density, moisture content, and mineral composition of the ground. In regions with limestone, gypsum, or salt deposits, these samples reveal whether dissolution or water infiltration is increasing. In urban areas, sampling helps verify whether old fill material is compacting or breaking down with age. Some cities use groundwater monitoring wells to watch for sudden water level changes. A rising water table can force soil apart, while a rapidly dropping one can remove essential buoyancy that supports underground cavities. These shifts often occur weeks or months before ground failure becomes visible at the surface. Remote sensing satellites add long-range oversight. Using a technique called interferometric synthetic aperture radar, satellites can track millimeter-level land movement over time. When the ground begins to sink slowly, even at a pace too small for a person to notice, these measurements provide critical warning signs. By combining all these technologies, engineers create a layered defense system. No single method is perfect, but together they dramatically improve the chances of identifying dangerous subsurface changes before a sudden collapse occurs. The idea of a skyscraper disappearing into the earth in a single night is dramatic, but the physics behind these structures makes that outcome extremely unlikely. Modern high-rise buildings are anchored by deep foundation systems, such as drilled shafts and reinforced concrete piles that extend many stories into stable ground layers. These foundations distribute weight across multiple contact points, meaning a failure at one location rarely causes the entire building to fall suddenly. Documented large sinkholes, including those in regions with active karst terrain, typically develop in stages. The collapse often begins with a subterranean cavity that enlarges gradually as water dissolves underlying rock. Even when a final collapse is abrupt, the surface usually shows early warning signs such as cracking pavement, tilted utility poles, and localized subsidence. Skyscrapers with active monitoring systems would detect these shifts long before catastrophic failure. For a high-rise to fall into a sinkhole in a single night, an extreme set of conditions would need to occur simultaneously. The ground would have to contain a massive hidden void directly beneath the building. The supporting bedrock would need to fail without warning, and the building's foundations would need to lose structural support at nearly every anchor point at once. There are no recorded cases of all these factors aligning beneath a modern skyscraper. More realistically, partial foundation loss could cause structural distress rather than sudden disappearance. A building might lean, fracture, or experience settlement that forces evacuation, but engineers could reinforce or stabilize the site before complete collapse occurred. In urban settings, rapid emergency response and ground stabilization protocols reduce the likelihood of uncontrolled failure. If a worst-case sinkhole opened under part of a skyscraper, the collapse would be uneven. One section might drop while the rest remained intact, creating a visible tilt or break rather than a clean vertical plunge. Rescue agencies would intervene immediately, and structural engineers would assess whether the remaining portions could be stabilized or required demolition. While overnight total collapse remains highly improbable, smaller sinkholes near skyscrapers can still cause serious damage. Roads, sidewalks, and nearby low-rise buildings are more vulnerable because they rely on shallower foundations. Many cities monitor past subsidence zones to prevent development on unstable terrain. The real risk lies not in skyscrapers being swallowed whole, but in the gradual weakening of urban ground caused by leaks, aging infrastructure, and changing water tables. Continuous monitoring, routine inspections, and strict geological surveys remain the most reliable way to prevent disaster. The storm arrives just as evening settles over the city. What begins as a flicker on the horizon quickly becomes a brilliant, continuous display of electrical activity stretching from one end of the skyline to the other. Residents crowd windows and balconies, watching forks of lightning connect with the highest rooftops. For a brief moment, it feels like nothing more than an unusually intense thunderstorm. The power stays on, buildings remain steady, and the glow of neon signs still reflects off the wet streets. It looks dramatic, but to most it appears harmless. This early calm exists because modern high-rises are built to guide lightning safely into the ground. The tallest structures bristle with metal rods called air terminals, forming the top layer of a lightning protection system designed to intercept strikes. When a lightning bolt connects with one of these terminals, the electrical charge flows through heavy copper or aluminum conductors that run inside the walls. These conductors channel the energy into deep grounding electrodes buried far below street level. This system ensures that, in a typical storm, even a strike carrying a voltage in the hundreds of millions poses no threat to the building's occupants. In these opening minutes, everything works exactly as engineers intended. The constant rumble of thunder shakes windows, but the infrastructure holds firm. Electronics remain stable because the city's grounding network disperses each strike safely and efficiently. People record the storm on their phones, uploading videos of lightning arcing across the skyline. Local weather stations monitor the storm's activity, noting that the frequency of the strikes is unusually high but not yet alarming. The illusion of normalcy stretches on, yet something feels slightly off. The intervals between flashes grow shorter until the sky barely returns to darkness before another bolt explodes downward. Meteorologists watching radar data notice that the storm cell is not drifting as storms normally do. Instead, it is almost stationary, locked in place by unusual atmospheric conditions. They recognize that this immobility is highly abnormal, but they do not yet understand the scale of what is happening. Inside the city, no one realizes that the storm's behavior defies the patterns of any typical thunderstorm. Most storms move because of large-scale wind patterns that push them across regions. A nearly motionless cell means the same area is being struck repeatedly, far beyond the design assumptions of normal infrastructure planning. The real danger lies not in what has already happened, but in what is coming next. For now, though, people assume the storm will pass. They assume the engineering will keep them safe. They assume this is just another dramatic evening. 6 hours into the storm, the mood in the city shifts. The sky, once simply bright with flashes, now pulses with a relentless strobe-like rhythm. There is no true moment of darkness. Each lightning strike sends a burst of electromagnetic energy outward, and with strikes occurring almost continuously. The city's electrical systems are under pressure they were never designed to endure. What was initially viewed as a dramatic weather event is becoming an unprecedented electrical assault. Every lightning bolt produces an electromagnetic pulse, strong enough to induce voltage in nearby conductive materials. Under normal conditions, these pulses are harmless because infrastructure is built to handle occasional surges. But with the storm sitting motionless over the city, the pulses are occurring so frequently that they are beginning to overwhelm protective equipment. Surge protectors, inside substations, transformers, and power distribution centers absorb enormous amounts of energy, but each device has a finite capacity. As the lightning continues without pause, these components begin to fail. Transformers, which normally operate within a strict range of electrical load, face repeated high-energy spikes that exceed their insulation limits. Some units overheat as their internal cooling oil fails to keep up with the increasing electrical stress. Others short out as the metal components inside them warp or melt from repeated surges. The moment a transformer fails, it triggers an automatic shutdown to prevent further damage, cutting off power to entire neighborhoods. These outages do not happen at once, but instead spread slowly and unevenly across the metropolitan area. The city's electrical grid reacts to each failure by rerouting power to compensate, but this redistribution places additional strain on the remaining infrastructure. This phenomenon, known as a cascading failure, can begin with only one or two damaged components. In this case, dozens are being hit with intense surges every minute. As more transformers go offline, the load on the surviving sections increases dramatically, accelerating the collapse of the system. Streetlights begin flickering as voltage levels fluctuate. Traffic signals, which depend on a stable power supply, malfunction or shut down entirely, turning major intersections into dangerous zones of confusion. In high-rise buildings, elevators pause between floors as backup systems attempt to compensate for irregular power flow. The first reports of electrical fires emerge as small appliances and outdated wiring in older structures fail under the growing stress. What makes the situation worse is the storm's persistence. Because the storm is not drifting, electrical workers cannot wait for conditions to improve before starting repairs. Lightning repeatedly strikes key pieces of infrastructure, making it unsafe for crews to even approach the damaged components. This leaves entire districts with no power and no immediate possibility of restoration. By the end of the 6th hour, the city is divided between pockets of light and expanding regions of darkness. The skyline still flickers with the glow of lightning rods doing their job, but at ground level, the early signs of systemic instability are unmistakable. The residents do not yet understand the scale of the crisis, but the first and most critical pillar of modern life, the electrical grid, is beginning to crumble beneath the weight of a storm that refuses to end. 24 hours after the storm first settled over the city, the situation has escalated far beyond electrical instability. The lightning has not weakened. In fact, meteorological models would show that such a stationary storm cell could grow more electrically active as atmospheric charge continues to build. With the grid failing in large sections of the city, a new danger begins to dominate the landscape: fire. Lightning is one of the leading natural causes of structural and wildland fires, and by this point, the storm has delivered far more strikes than any urban area has ever absorbed in such a short period. The tallest and most modern skyscrapers, shielded by multi-layer lightning protection systems, continue to channel energy safely into the ground. But these systems are not universal. Many older structures, particularly those built before modern building codes required standardized lightning protection, are vulnerable. Their rooftops and exterior materials offer little resistance to a direct hit. Small fires begin in isolated pockets, often unnoticed at first because communication systems are already deteriorating. One strike ignites the roof of a century-old apartment building whose wooden beams have dried over decades. Another bolt finds the metal vent of a commercial warehouse, overheating wiring inside the walls until flames break through. In residential neighborhoods, trees are hit repeatedly. Moisture inside the trunks flashes into steam, causing sections of wood to burst outward and scatter burning fragments across yards and rooftops. Compounding the situation is the failure of electrical infrastructure. When power systems collapse unevenly, certain circuits can overload in ways that cause appliances, breakers, or outdated electrical panels to ignite. Under normal circumstances, fire departments rely on a coordinated emergency dispatch system and functioning traffic lights to navigate toward trouble spots. But with electricity unreliable and signals failing across half the city, response times lengthen dramatically. The spread of fires becomes a logistical nightmare. Roads are clogged with stalled vehicles whose electronic systems were damaged by electromagnetic surges. Streetlights are dark along major corridors. Areas that still have electricity face sporadic power spikes that complicate the work of firefighters using electrically powered equipment. Meanwhile, severe winds generated by the storm's updrafts and downdrafts act like bellows, feeding oxygen into open flames and carrying embers into new areas. By the end of the first full day, the city is no longer simply battling a storm. It is contending with dozens of independent fire outbreaks, each growing faster than emergency teams can contain. The skyline, still illuminated by constant lightning, now flickers with pockets of orange glow scattered through multiple districts. Smoke begins to blanket low-lying areas, reducing visibility and introducing hazardous air quality conditions. The modern city, engineered to withstand typical severe weather, is now encountering a type of event that no building code, emergency plan, or electrical system was ever designed to handle. And this is only the first day. The days ahead will reveal consequences far more severe as the invisible systems beneath the city begin to collapse completely. A massive lightning storm that refuses to end would not just damage a city's power grid or communication lines. Over time, the entire structure of the city would begin to fall apart in ways that most disaster plans never fully prepare for. The first major issue would be transportation. With constant lightning, airports would shut down, bridges would be unsafe, and road sensors would stop working. Emergency vehicles would struggle to move because every exposed area would be a potential strike zone. Another problem would be the breakdown of supply systems. Delivery trucks would be unable to operate normally, and the constant electrical surges would cause refrigerated storage to fail. Grocery stores and pharmacies could run low on goods within about 1 week, especially items that require cold temperatures. Even fuel supplies would become unreliable because electric pumps and safety systems would be affected by repeated surges. Water management systems would also face new dangers. Continuous flashes of lightning can damage pumps, treatment plants, and pressure controls, leading to contamination risks. Stormwater drains would overflow day after day because the ground would never have time to dry. Flooding would move higher into neighborhoods and commercial areas, even without heavy rainfall, simply because drainage systems would be overwhelmed. Hospitals would reach a breaking point as well. Backup generators can run for a limited amount of time, but constant lightning makes fuel deliveries dangerous. Sensitive medical equipment could fail because of repeated surges, and doctors would need to rely on simpler tools, Patients who require powered devices would be the most at risk. Meanwhile, long-term lightning strikes can create heat pockets and electrical fires across the city. Firefighters would struggle to contain these blazes because every time they deploy, they expose themselves to open-air danger. Even metal equipment could attract strikes, making rescue attempts more difficult. Over several weeks, entire blocks could experience rolling fires, caused by the non-stop electrical activity. Psychological stress would rise sharply too. Humans are not built to live under constant flashes, thunder, and the feeling of an unstable environment. Studies show that ongoing severe storms can increase anxiety, sleep problems, and decision-making issues. In this scenario, those effects would be multiplied because there would be no break in the noise or tension. By this stage, the city government would face hard choices. Leaders would consider partial evacuations, resource rationing, and limited curfews to keep people safe. But even those actions would be complicated because outdoor movement would be risky. The longer the storm continued, the more a city would shift from normal operations to survival mode. After weeks of non-stop lightning, the question becomes whether a city can continue functioning at all. At some point, the damage to infrastructure, public safety, and the natural environment would reach a level that no emergency plan could sustain. The first major concern is long-term structural weakening. Buildings are designed to handle occasional storms, but repeated electrical strikes can slowly damage roofs, metal framing, and grounding systems. Even structures built with lightning rods would eventually face heat stress and wear. Another major challenge would be the loss of essential workers. Over time, police officers, firefighters, medical staff, and utility crews would be stretched far beyond normal limits. Many would need rest or relocation simply to stay safe. Without a full team of trained personnel, key services would start to collapse. This shortage would make it harder to maintain order, treat injuries, or repair damaged equipment. Resource depletion would become another deciding factor. Water treatment plants, fuel depots, and communication hubs cannot operate indefinitely under constant electrical stress. Supplies could not be transported easily because of the continuous strikes, and the risk to drivers would increase each day. After a certain point, keeping people in the city would be more dangerous than moving them out. Environmental changes would also play a role. Continuous lightning can spark ground fires, especially in dry areas, and those fires can create smoke that lingers over neighborhoods. In other regions, the ground may stay saturated for so long that trees weaken and fall more often, creating another layer of danger. Repeated thunder and flashes can also disturb wildlife, causing animals to flee into urban zones and create new hazards, and at this stage, governments would likely declare a full evacuation. Moving people during an ongoing lightning storm would be complicated, but not impossible. Officials would rely on sheltered routes, staggered departure windows, and reinforced transportation vehicles to reduce exposure. Emergency shelters outside the city would need to be prepared with food, power, and medical support for thousands of people arriving at once. Once the city is empty, the final challenge becomes long-term recovery. A never-ending lightning storm would leave behind damaged electrical grids, contaminated water systems, weakened buildings, and scorched land. Engineers would need to inspect every major structure before anyone could return. Restoring utilities might take weeks or even months, depending on the scale of the storm's impact. In the end, while a massive never-ending lightning storm would not literally erase a city from the map, it could force a complete evacuation and leave the area unlivable for an extended period. The true danger is not a single strike, but the slow, relentless breakdown of systems that people rely on every day.